I stand outside the courthouse, my hands trembling as I hold the papers that grant me custody of my son, Alex. 5 years, it took 5 long years to get to this point. I've imagined this moment countless times, but now that it's here, the victory feels hollow. The scars from the battle are deep, and the wounds haven't fully healed. Across the street, Alex plays on the swings, his movement slow, uncertain. He's not like other kids, not anymore. His laughter doesn't come easily, and when it does, it's cautious, like he's afraid it might be taken away. He keeps glancing at me, as if trying to figure out who I am. It's not his fault. Lily made sure he'd see me as the enemy, as I watch him. I can't help but think about how different things used to be. How different I used to be. It's strange, talking to you about this, baring my soul to someone I've never met. But maybe it's easier this way. Maybe by sharing my story, I can make sense of it all. Maybe it'll help someone else who's going through the same thing. Let me take you back to where it all began. 5 years ago, life seemed perfect, or at least, as perfect as life could be. I had a beautiful wife, Lily, and 2 incredible sons, Ethan and Alex. We lived in a modest but comfortable home in the suburbs. I worked a steady job in finance, and while it wasn't my dream career, it provided for my family. I thought we were happy. I thought we were solid, but there were cracks in the foundation, cracks I was too blind to see. Looking back, I realized the signs were there all along, the late-night texts, the sudden interest in her appearance, the way she started pulling away from me emotionally. But I ignored it, chalking it up to the stress of everyday life. I was a fool. It was a Tuesday, a day like any other. I had finished a big project at work and decided to surprise Lily by coming home early. I remember feeling excited, imagining the look on her face when she saw me. I wanted to whisk her away for a spontaneous lunch date, something we hadn't done in years, but when I pulled into the driveway and saw the unfamiliar car parked there, my heart sank. A part of me knew, even before I opened the door. When I walked inside and saw them, Lily and a man I didn't recognize, everything stopped. My heart, my breath, my thoughts. I was frozen in place, watching as my life crumbled before my eyes. They didn't see me at first. I stood there, in the doorway, watching as they laughed, as they kissed. It felt like I was watching a nightmare, one that I couldn't wake up from. When they finally noticed me, Lily's face went pale. She didn't try to explain, didn't even try to apologize. Instead, she just stared at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Pity, maybe? Or was it relief? I didn't say a word. I couldn't. I turned and left, driving aimlessly for hours. The pain was unbearable, like a knife twisting in my chest. I kept replaying the scene in my mind, over and over, trying to make sense of it, but there was no sense to be made. How could she do this? How could she betray me, betray our family, like that? The days that followed were a blur. I confronted Lily the next day, but the conversation was brief, almost clinical. She admitted to the affair, said she had been unhappy for years. She had fallen out of love with me, she said. The words hit me like a sledgehammer. How had I missed this? How had I not seen the signs? Then came the final blow. She was taking the kids. She had already filed for divorce, had already made arrangements to move in with her new partner. She had planned it all out, down to the last detail. I was blindsided, unprepared for the devastation that was about to hit me. Losing my family broke something inside me. I fell into a deep depression, a dark hole that I couldn't climb out of. The days blurred together, each one more painful than the last. I stopped going to work, stopped taking care of myself. The only thing I could think about was the betrayal, the loss. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I was a shell of the man I used to be. Lily kept the kids from me, told them lies about why I wasn't around. She said I didn't want to see them, that I had abandoned them. They were too young to understand, too young to question her words. And so, they believed her. The distance between us grew, and with each passing day, I felt myself slipping further away from them. There were moments, dark, desperate moments, when I thought about ending it all. The pain was too much, the emptiness too vast. I didn't see a way out. I remember sitting in the bathroom one night, a bottle of pills in one hand, a glass of water in the other. I was ready to end it, ready to let go of the pain, but something stopped me. A voice, maybe, or a memory. I thought of my boys, of their smiles, their laughter. I thought about how much they needed me, even if they didn't know it. I couldn't leave them like that. I couldn't let Lily's lies be the last thing they remembered about me. So I put the pills down, took a deep breath, and decided to keep going. For them, climbing out of that dark hole felt like trying to scale a mountain with no end in sight. The weight of everything that had happened, the betrayal, the loss of my children, the crushing depression, was like a boulder strapped to my back, making each step forward almost impossible. But something inside me refused to give up. Maybe it was the faint memory of who I used to be, or maybe it was the thought of my boys, growing up without their father, believing the lies their mother had fed them. Whatever it was, it kept me from sinking completely. The first step was the hardest, admitting that I needed help. For a long time, I resisted therapy. I didn't want to talk to anyone about what had happened. It felt too raw, too painful, and I wasn't ready to confront it. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I realized I couldn't do it alone. I couldn't keep spiraling down into that dark place, or I'd never make it out. Finding the right therapist was a challenge in itself. The first few I saw didn't seem to get it. They offered platitudes, surface-level advice that didn't touch the depth of the pain I was in. But then I found Dr. Harris. From the first session, I knew she was different. She didn't just listen, she challenged me. She forced me to confront the anger, the sadness, the guilt. She made me dig deep into the roots of my pain, to face the parts of myself that I had been avoiding for so long. It wasn't easy. In fact, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. There were days when I left her office feeling worse than when I went in, but slowly, very slowly, I started to heal. Therapy wasn't about fixing what was broken, it was about learning to live with the scars. To move forward even when the pain was still there. As I began to heal emotionally, I knew I needed to rebuild my life physically and mentally as well. I started with small changes, ones that seemed insignificant at first but made a big difference over time. I forced myself to get out of bed every morning, no matter how heavy the weight of depression felt. I began exercising regularly, even if it was just a short walk around the block at first. The physical activity helped clear my mind, gave me a sense of control that I had lost. It was as if, by strengthening my body, I was also strengthening my resolve to keep going. Diet was another area I took control of. During my darkest days, I had barely eaten, and when I did, it was junk food, empty calories that did nothing to nourish me. I started eating healthier, cooking for myself instead of relying on takeout. It wasn't just about the food, it was about taking care of myself in a way that I hadn't in a long time. Every meal I prepared felt like a small victory, a step towards reclaiming my life, but it wasn't just about my physical health. I needed something more, something to give me a sense of purpose again. My job in finance had been stable, but it wasn't fulfilling. It had never been my passion, just a means to an end. In the wake of everything that had happened, I realized I needed something more than just a paycheck. I needed something that was mine, something that I could build from the ground up. That's when the idea of starting my own business took root. It was a crazy idea, especially given my state of mind at the time, but it was also exactly what I needed. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but the thought of creating something new, something that was entirely my own, gave me a sense of hope I hadn't felt in a long time. The early days of the business were rough. I made mistakes, plenty of them. I underestimated costs, overestimated demand, and there were moments when it felt like everything was going to fall apart before it even got off the ground. But I didn't quit. I couldn't. Every time I thought about giving up, I reminded myself of what was at stake. This business wasn't just about making money, it was about proving to myself that I could still achieve something, that I could still be the man I wanted to be. As the business slowly started to grow, so did my confidence. It wasn't an overnight success, in fact, there were many sleepless nights, many moments of doubt. But every small victory, every new client, every successful project felt like a step forward. I was building something, piece by piece, and with each step, I felt a little more like the person I used to be, but even as the business took off, there was always something missing. My boys. Ethan and Alex. No matter how much success I found in my new venture, the absence of my children was a constant ache, a reminder of the life I had lost. I knew I couldn't be truly happy until I had them back in my life. I knew that the battle to win them back would be long and grueling. But I was ready for it. Hiring a lawyer was the next big step. I found someone who specialized in family law, someone who wasn't afraid to fight dirty if necessary. I knew I was in for a battle, and I needed someone who would go to war for me. The legal process was slow, agonizingly so. Every step forward seemed to be met with 2 steps back. Lily fought me at every turn, using every trick in the book to keep me away from the boys. She painted me as an unstable, unfit father, and the court battles became a drawn-out war of attrition. But I didn't give up. I couldn't. I attended every hearing, every mediation, every court-ordered evaluation. I followed every recommendation, jumped through every hoop. I kept my business going through it all, balancing the demands of my work with the stress of the legal battle. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I felt like I was being stretched too thin, but I knew I couldn't afford to fail. My boys were counting on me, even if they didn't know it. After 5 long years, the judge finally ruled in my favor. I was granted custody of Alex, my youngest. The moment the decision came down, I felt a flood of emotions, relief, joy, but also an overwhelming sadness. I had fought so hard, for so long, but I had only won half the battle. Ethan, my oldest, wanted nothing to do with me. Lily had poisoned him against me, and I didn't know how to reach him. The victory was bittersweet, but it was a start. I had Alex back, and that was something to hold on to. Winning custody of Alex was supposed to be the beginning of our new life together, but the reality was far more complicated. I had envisioned us picking up where we left off, bonding as father and son, but things weren't that simple. When Alex first came to live with me, it was like living with a stranger. He was distant, cautious, and I could see the fear in his eyes whenever we were alone together. The lies Lily had told him had left deep scars, and he didn't know who to trust. I tried to be patient, to give him space, but it was hard. I wanted so badly to reconnect with him, to make up for the lost time, but I knew I couldn't force it. I had to earn his trust, to show him that I wasn't the monster his mother had made me out to be. It was a slow, painful process, filled with setbacks and small victories. In the early days, I tried to keep things light and easy. We'd go for walks in the park, play board games, watch movies together. I avoided talking about anything heavy, steering clear of the topic of his mother and the divorce. I knew that any mention of Lily would only push him further away, so I focused on building a new foundation, one based on trust and honesty. But no matter how hard I tried, there was always a tension between us, an unspoken wall that I didn't know how to break down. Alex was polite, even obedient, but there was a distance in his eyes, a wariness that never seemed to go away. It was like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. For me to reveal the monster his mother had told him about. There were nights when I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd ever get through to him. I'd think about all the years we had lost, all the moments I'd missed, his first day of school, his soccer games, his birthdays. I wanted so badly to make up for it, but I knew I couldn't turn back the clock. All I could do was move forward. One day at a time, I began to focus on the little things, the small moments that could help bridge the gap between us. I'd ask him about his day, about his interests, trying to find common ground. At first, his answers were short, guarded, but slowly, he began to open up. I discovered that he loved art, that he was an incredibly talented artist for his age. He showed me some of his drawings, sketches of superheroes, landscapes, animals. They were good, really good, and I made sure to tell him that. I could see the pride in his eyes when I praised his work, and it felt like the first real connection we'd made. I decided to nurture that interest. I bought him art supplies, sketch pads, pencils, paints, and encouraged him to pursue his passion. We'd spend afternoons together, him drawing while I worked nearby, and gradually, the silence between us became more comfortable. I'd ask him about his drawings, what inspired them, and sometimes he'd share a bit more, letting me into his world, one sketch at a time. It wasn't much, but it was a start. There were still difficult days, though. Days when Alex would withdraw completely, lost in his thoughts, and I'd feel that familiar sense of helplessness creeping back in. It was hard not to blame Lily for the damage she'd caused, for the wall she'd built between us, but I knew dwelling on that wouldn't help. I had to focus on the future, on building a new relationship with my son, no matter how slow the process was. One evening, a breakthrough happened. Alex and I were sitting in the living room, both of us working on our own projects, me on some paperwork for the business, him on a new drawing. Out of nowhere, he asked, "Dad, why did you and Mom split up?" The question hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been dreading this moment, knowing it would come eventually, but I wasn't prepared for it. I put down my pen and took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. I didn't want to lie to him, but I also didn't want to burden him with the full truth. "Not yet, Alex," I started, my voice calm but steady. "Sometimes, people grow apart. Your mom and I, we stopped understanding each other the way we used to. It wasn't your fault, or Ethan's. It was between us." He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Mom said you didn't want us." Those words cut deeper than any knife. I felt a flash of anger, but I pushed it down, knowing that reacting emotionally would only make things worse. "That's not true," I said softly. "I've always wanted you and your brother in my life. I fought every day to get you back. I know your mom told you things that make me seem like the bad guy, but I want you to know that I've always loved you, Alex. I never stopped." He didn't say anything, just looked down at his drawing. The silence hung heavy between us, and for a moment, I thought I had pushed too far. But then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you come for us sooner?" That question, so simple and yet so loaded, brought a lump to my throat. I could feel the tears welling up, but I blinked them away, determined to stay strong for him. "I tried, Alex," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I tried so hard. But things were complicated. Your mom. She made it difficult for me to see you and Ethan. I had to fight through a lot of obstacles to get to where we are now. But I never gave up, and I never will." He didn't respond. But I could see the wheels turning in his mind, the internal struggle as he tried to reconcile the two versions of his father, the one his mother had told him about and the one sitting in front of him now. I knew it would take time, that this was just the beginning of a long journey to rebuild his trust, but at least the door was open now. The first real crack in the wall Lily had built between us. After that conversation, things began to change, slowly but surely. Alex started to talk to me more, to share bits and pieces of his life that I hadn't been a part of for so long. He still had his guard up, still kept a part of himself hidden, but the distance between us began to shrink. We spent more time together, not just in the same room, but actually engaging with each other. I made it a point to be there for him, to listen, to support him in whatever way he needed. The art continued to be a bridge between us. One day, I surprised him with an easel and a set of oil paints, something a bit more advanced than the sketchpads and pencils he was used to. His eyes lit up when he saw it. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw genuine excitement in his expression. "Thanks, Dad," he said, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. It wasn't much, just a simple thank you, but it meant the world to me. It was a sign that we were making progress, that I was slowly earning back his trust. We spent that weekend together, painting side by side. I wasn't much of an artist, but I gave it my best shot, trying to keep up with him. He'd laugh at my attempts, giving me tips and pointers, and for the first time, it felt like we were really connecting. We weren't just father and son, we were two people who were learning to understand each other again. As the months passed, our bond continued to strengthen. There were still challenges, of course. Alex had moments of doubt, times when he'd retreat back into his shell, and I had to remind myself to be patient. The wounds Lily had inflicted wouldn't heal overnight, and I couldn't expect him to trust me completely after everything he'd been through. But I could see the changes in him, the way he began to relax around me, the way he started to rely on me more and more. The hardest part, though, was knowing that my other son, Ethan, was still out of reach. He was older, more set in his ways, and the damage Lily had done to our relationship was even deeper. He refused to see me, refused to talk to me. And every time I tried to reach out, I was met with silence or outright hostility. It broke my heart, but I knew I couldn't force him to come back into my life. I could only hope that, in time, he'd see the truth for himself. I'd talk to Alex about Ethan sometimes, trying to gauge how he felt about his brother's absence. He missed him, that much was clear, but he didn't know how to bridge the gap between them any more than I did. I encouraged him to keep the lines of communication open, to let Ethan know that he was always welcome, but I didn't push. I knew it had to happen on its own terms. One day, Alex came to me with an idea. "Dad, what if we invite Ethan over for dinner? Just the three of us. No pressure, just a meal. Maybe he'll come." I was taken aback by the suggestion. It was the first time Alex had shown an active interest in bringing Ethan back into our lives, and it gave me a glimmer of hope. "That's a great idea, Alex," I said, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. "We can plan something special, make his favorite meal. I think he'd appreciate that." Alex nodded, a determined look on his face. "I'll call him. I'll let him know it's just us. No pressure, like you said." The days leading up to that dinner were filled with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. I tried not to get my hopes up too high, knowing that Ethan might not show, but I couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. If he did come, it could be the first step towards healing our fractured relationship. The night of the dinner, I cooked Ethan's favorite meal, spaghetti and meatballs, something he'd always loved as a kid. Alex helped, and we set the table together, the air filled with a nervous energy. As the time drew closer, I kept glancing at the clock, each passing minute making my heart race a little faster. Finally, the doorbell rang. Alex and I exchanged a look, and I could see the hope in his eyes. He ran to the door, and I followed, trying to keep my emotions in check. When Alex opened the door, there stood Ethan, looking older and more guarded than I remembered, but he was there. He had come. "Hey, Ethan," Alex said, his voice tentative. "Thanks for coming." Ethan nodded, his eyes flicking between Alex and me. "Yeah. I figured it was time." Hearing those words from my eldest son, after so many years of silence and distance, was like a balm to my wounded heart. I stepped forward, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's good to see you, Ethan. We've missed you." He didn't say anything at first, just nodded again, but there was a softness in his eyes that hadn't been there before. We led him to the table, and as we sat down to eat, I could feel the tension slowly melting away. The conversation was slow at first, awkward, but as the meal went on, it started to flow more naturally. We talked about simple things, school, work, the business, but it felt good, like we were finally starting to reconnect. By the end of the night, there was a sense of hope that hadn't been there before. Ethan was still guarded, still cautious, but he had taken the first step. He had shown up, and that meant the world to me. As he left, I made sure to let him know that he was always welcome. That we were here for him, no matter what. As I closed the door behind him, I felt a sense of peace that I hadn't felt in a long time. The road to healing was still long, and there would be more challenges ahead, but for the first time in years, I felt like we were on the right path. I looked at Alex, who was smiling, and I knew that we were going to be okay. We were rebuilding our family, one piece at a time, and that was all I could ask for. Over the next few months, Ethan began visiting more often, each time staying a little longer, talking a little more. The tension between us gradually eased, and though we still had a long way to go, it felt like the walls were finally coming down. One evening, after dinner, Ethan stayed behind while Alex went to his room. We sat in silence for a moment before he finally spoke. "Dad, I know things were bad for a long time. But I can see you're trying, and I want to try too." His words hit me like a wave of relief. I looked at him, seeing the boy I used to know in the young man before me. That means more to me than you know, Ethan. I'm here whenever you're ready. As he left that night, I knew we were on the path to healing. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't be quick, but we were rebuilding our family, one day at a time. And for the first time in years, I felt like we were going to make it. We had faced the darkness, and now, finally, we were stepping into the light together,